Hello, my name is Neil Callahan, and I am your instructor for EDU 145, Child Development 2, and this video serves as part 3 of the Chapter 10 video presentation on emotional development. So in part 3, we will start here talking about infant attachment. So let me get our presentation rolling here. All right, infant attachment. When you say infant attachment, you can also say a bond, but however you want to say it. Attachment is a close emotional bond between two people. In this case, we're talking about the close emotional bond between child and caregiver, whether you're talking about mom, dad, child care professional, whatever. That's what the attachment bond is. The attachment bond or the bond or bonding, whatever you want to call it. It is a close emotional bond between child and caregiver. Now, there are many theories about infant attachment or child attachment. The many different theories of attachment. We're going to touch on a few of them. Here are just a few examples of theories of infant attachment. Sigmund Freud has a little bit to say, Harry Harlow, Erik Erikson, and John Bowlby, and then we'll talk about Mary Ainsworth. I don't know why I didn't include her there. Maybe that's something I'll fix in the future. But let's see what Freud had to say. Now, Sigmund Freud believed that infants become attached to the person or the object that provides oral satisfaction. In other words, the person that feeds them or the thing that feeds them. And for most people, for most children, the person that fed them on the most regular basis was their mother. Doesn't have to necessarily be the case, but in most cases, we're talking about mother, whether it be breastfeeding or a bottle. So Freud believed that infants become attached to the person or the object that provides oral satisfaction, food, feeding. Now, think about what Freud just said. He placed a high premium on feeding when it came to the attachment process. And, Freud said the infant became attached to the person or object. Object meaning, not a person. So it begs the question, is feeding that important to the attachment process? If you're not the one feeding the child, are you risking not forming an attachment bond to the child? If a child is mostly fed by their mother, does that mean that the child will not bond with their father? I mean, it's a good question. So is feeding that important to the attachment process? To find the answer to the question, you need to look at the research of Harry Harlow. Here's Harry Harlow, him and his rhesus monkeys, and this is his little experiment he did with surrogate mothers. In this case, the surrogate mother being an inanimate object that provided sustenance, food, milk. Harry Harlow, he lived from 1905 to 1981. So let's talk a little bit about his experiment, his monkey experiment from 1958. All right, what Harlow did was he took his infant monkeys and removed them from their actual mother at birth. Okay, and for 6 months, these baby monkeys were reared by a surrogate, a substitute, quote-unquote, mother. That thing I just showed you in the previous picture. An inanimate object. One surrogate mother was made of wire. The other one was made the same way, but it was covered with cloth. Okay, let's go back. One mother looked like this, basically just covered in wire, and it had the milk bottle at the bottom. And the other one was made the same way, but it was covered with some, some fur fabric, and it had the bottle at the bottom. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so half the infant monkeys, half of them were fed by the wire mother. The other half were fed by the cloth mother. All right, you with me? All right, periodically, the amount of time the infant monkey spent with either the wire mother or the cloth mother was computed. So they recorded how long baby monkeys spent with wire mama and how long baby monkeys spent with cloth mama. Remember, half were with wire mama to get food, half were with cloth mama to get food, and they documented how much time they spent with her. Regardless of which mother fed the infants, the infant monkeys spent way more time with the cloth mother. Okay? So regardless of which one fed them, they spent more time with cloth mama. Let's look at some further research they did. Through further research, they found that even if the wire mother and not the cloth mother provided nourishment, the infant monkeys still spent more time with cloth mother. In other words, what they did in a further experiment, they took the milk bottle off of the cloth mother. The only one that had the milk was the wire mother. So even if the wire mother was the only one that had milk and the cloth mother didn't have any milk, they still spent more time with cloth mother, whether she had milk or not. Very interesting. And when Harlow frightened the monkeys, those that were raised by the cloth mother ran to her and clung to her. Those that were raised by the wire mother didn't do that. What he found was comfort must be associated with security. When a child feels comfortable with you, they feel secure. That's the association he made, that comfort is associated with security. And the problem with the wire mother is she didn't provide comfort, because have you tried to lay on wire? Is it very comfortable? No. Only the cloth mother provided comfort. So let's ask the question again that Freud did. Is feeding that important to the attachment process? No, it's not. Feeding is not that important to the attachment process. Feeding is not as critical for attachment as Freud thought it was. Contact comfort, familiarity, trust, those are much more important factors when it comes to forming an attachment bond than who feeds the child. If the child feels comfortable with you, is familiar with you, trusts you, that's much more important in forming an attachment bond with the child than it is simply feeding them. So keep that in mind. All right, what did Erikson have to say about infant attachment? Well, you got to go back to his theory of psychosocial development and look at stage 1, trust versus mistrust. The whole task there is, does the infant learn to trust their primary caregiver? Do they form a secure bond with their primary caregiver? If they do not form a secure bond with their primary caregiver, then they do not form trust. Okay? And in order to form that secure bond, to trust that caregiver, the caregiver has to fulfill their needs. Their need for comfort, their need for food, their need to be changed, and their need to be interacted with. According to Erikson, these feelings set the stage for future circumstances. If the child learns to trust their primary caregiver and form a strong bond with them, then the thought is they can extend that courtesy to other people who do the same thing, who fulfill their needs. If the child learns to mistrust their primary caregiver and not form a secure bond, then they're not as willing to form relationships with future people because they are weary and naturally distrustful. Now, let's see what John Bowlby has to say about infant attachment. Now, of course, John Bowlby was a leading figure in infant attachment theory. He lived from 1907 to 1990. Later on in this presentation, we're going to talk about Mary Ainsworth, another infant attachment theorist. There was a time she worked with John Bowlby, so in some aspects their work is intertwined. She was, of course, influenced by his work, and like I said, at one point even worked with him. But let's start out with John Bowlby in our discussion. Of course, Bowlby feels that both infants and their primary caregivers are biologically predisposed to form attachments. That's his thought process. He feels that infants and primary caregivers are biologically somehow predisposed to have a need to form attachments. He argues that newborn babies are biologically equipped to elicit attachment behaviors. He called an attachment behavior any sort of gesture or signal that promoted or maintained proximity between the infant and the caregiver. Crying, cooing, babbling, clinging, smiling, doing all that cute stuff that babies do. All of those are attachment behaviors. These are things that infants naturally do, and over time they learn that if they do these things, you come a-calling and you come and interact with them. So they're attachment behaviors. They do these things to get you to interact with them because they need you. It's a survival mechanism. These are things that they're not taught. These are things they naturally do. So that's why he feels that they are biologically equipped with these things from day one. They do these things, and like I said, over time they learn that, if I cry and coo and babble and act all cute, you come and hold me, which is what I want, or you come and feed me, which is what I want. So they learn to do that to get you to do it. It's an attachment behavior. It's a survival mechanism. Like I said, the infant uses them to keep you nearby. And like I said, they quickly learn what works and they use it. Bowlby believed that attachment forms gradually over time in phases. He talks about 4 phases of the attachment process. But, a child and a primary caregiver, according to Bowlby, form that attachment bond over time. They learn to trust you. It's just not a on day one sort of thing. You got to work for it. So he believes that the attachment process goes through 4 phases. So it takes a little time. Phase 1 he called indiscriminate responsiveness to humans. We're talking roughly birth to age 2 months. Phase 2, we're talking about focusing on familiar people, roughly 2 months to 7 months of age. Phase 3, we're talking about intense attachment and active proximity seeking, roughly 7 months of age to age 2. And then phase 4, partnership behavior, roughly age 2 until the end of the childhood period. Those are the 4 phases of the attachment process according to John Bowlby. Let's look at each one in a bit more detail. Phase 1, the infant instinctively orients to human figures. They love to interact with human faces, whether it be a stranger, a sibling, or a parent. It doesn't matter. Each one is equally likely to elicit a smile or a cry from an infant. So infants during phase 1 instinctively orient to human figures, regardless of whether it's someone they don't know, a sibling, or a parent. Each one of these individuals is equally likely to elicit a response, smiling or crying, for instance. Phase 2, the attachment becomes much more focused on a particular figure, usually the primary caregiver. In the beginning, phase 1, they're pretty much happy with anybody. But as they move forward through the process, phase 2, that attachment becomes much more focused on one figure, the primary caregiver, the one that provides most of the caregiving. The baby focuses their attention more on the primary caregiver, or they start that, because they are gradually learning to distinguish between familiar people that they see on a regular basis as opposed to the unfamiliar people that they don't see on a regular basis or have just seen once. Then we move to phase 3. We're talking about specific attachments are developed at this point. The child has formed specific attachment bonds to specific people, mom, dad, child care provider. And as they become more mobile, as their locomotion skills increase, unlike when they were younger, they now can actively seek out contact with these attachment figures. When they were much younger and not mobile, they had to depend on their attachment behaviors to draw you in. But once they're able to become mobile, if they don't respond to the attachment behaviors, they'll just get up, walk, and crawl over to you. They are actively seeking proximity. They want to be around you, you who are one of the primary caregivers. Then you got phase 4. At this point, children become aware of the feelings of others, their goals, their plans, and they begin to take these things into account when they direct their own actions and behaviors. You see, prior to age 2 of age, according to Bowlby, he felt that children are concerned only with their need to maintain proximity to a favorite caregiver. But once they get beyond this point, they're focusing on different things. So according to Bowlby, prior to age 2, children are concerned mainly with their need to maintain proximity with their favored primary caregivers. And, beyond that, they start to become more aware that others have feelings, goals, and plans, and they begin to take those things into account and direct their actions in other pursuits, not just seeking proximity with their primary caregiver. Let's talk about individual differences in attachment. Now, Mary Ainsworth her research took a different look at infant attachment. She wanted to talk about the different qualities of attachment because different children have different types of attachments to their primary caregiver. Some children have secure attachments. Some have various degrees of insecure attachments. So her research set out to look at these individual differences in attachment. She looked at, like I said, the quality of a child's attachment and how it varied. So let's take a look at the work of Mary Ainsworth. Mary Ainsworth, 1913 to 1999. Here we're going to talk about the different patterns of attachment. Now, for a time, she lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and one of her famous studies was called the Baltimore Study. It was conducted in Baltimore. And in Baltimore, mothers and their young children were observed in their homes during the child's first year of life. So for a year, Miss Ainsworth would go around and observe mothers and their babies during that first year of life in their home. And she would document what she saw. She did that for a year. And she made a visit to the homes every 3 weeks for about 4 hours. So she did that for a year. Okay. Now, once the infants reached 12 months of age, Ainsworth wanted to see how the children would behave in a different setting. A child's home is familiar to them. That is a familiar setting. How would they behave in an unfamiliar setting? So she invited the mothers and their infants to her playroom that she had set up at Johns Hopkins University. Now, Ainsworth, she wanted to see how the infants would use their mother as a secure base from which to venture out and explore this new environment. In other words, how would they use their mother as a safe base to go out and explore this new playroom there in her laboratory at the Johns Hopkins University? She also wanted to see how these infants would react to 2 brief separations from their primary caregiver. In the first separation, the primary caregiver would leave the baby with a stranger. In this case, the stranger was a friendly female graduate student. In the second separation, the baby was left totally alone. Now, each one of these separations lasted only 3 minutes. And if the child got really out of sorts and too distressed, then that time was cut short. Now, this whole entire process, this whole entire procedure took about 20 minutes in length. This procedure became known as Ainsworth's strange situation. Now, to give the strange situation a definition, you would have to say that it is an observational measure of infant attachment that requires the infant to move through a series of introductions, separations, and reunions with the caregiver and an adult stranger in a prescribed order. That is the technical definition as to what the strange situation is. Mary Ainsworth's experiment that she conducted at Johns Hopkins University. All right. Now, like I said, she went to their homes. She observed them in their home environment for a year. And then after that year was up, she then invited them to her laboratory playroom and she observed them some more. And then she compiled her data and then she released the results. So what did she find? In her research, she found 4 attachment patterns. She observed 4 different attachment patterns. She observed securely attached infants, and she observed 3 types of insecure attachments. She observed insecure avoidant infants, insecure resistant infants, and insecure disorganized infants. So 3 different types of insecure attachment. Let's take a look at each one. The securely attached babies use their mama as a secure base from which to go out and explore the environment. And when they are in the presence of their caregiver, they would explore the new environment. And when their caregiver stepped out for a minute, they'd put up a little protest, a mild protest. But when their caregiver came back after 3 minutes, these infants would reestablish a positive interaction with their primary caregiver, perhaps by smiling or climbing into her lap. And once they reestablished, then they would go right back out into the environment and explore some more. Okay? What about the different forms of insecure attachment that Ainsworth saw? The insecure avoidant babies showed insecurity by avoiding their mother. Hence the word avoidant. They avoid their mother. In the strange situation, these babies engaged very little with their caregiver to begin with. And they were not distressed when their caregiver left the room for a short period of time. So they didn't engage with her much when she was there. They weren't distressed when she left, and usually when she came back, they didn't reestablish contact with her either because, hey, they didn't have contact with her before she left. They might even turn their back on her. If contact was established, they usually lean away or look away. So this is the kind of behavior the insecure avoidant children would display. What about the insecure resistant babies? They often clinged to their caregiver, and then they would resist her by fighting against the closeness, perhaps by pushing or kicking her away. So these insecure resistant babies were either extremely clingy 1 minute, and then the next minute they didn't want nothing to do with her, pushing and kicking and trying to get away from her. Now, in the strange situation, these babies were often very clingy to their caregiver, and they didn't explore the classroom. They didn't explore the environment. They stayed attached to mom, attached to her leg, whatever. Now, when that caregiver stepped out for a few minutes, they would often cry loudly. And once she came back and tried to reestablish, contact with the child, they would push her away, the primary caregiver, if she tried to comfort them, as if to say, look, back up off me, So, they were very clingy to begin with, and during the experiment, they didn't explore the environment much or at all. And when she left, they would, be real sad about it, cry loudly. And when she came back and tried to, comfort the child, try to, reestablish contact, they didn't want nothing to do with her, resistant to the whole thing. Then you got the insecure and disorganized babies. Their behavior could only be described as disorganized and disoriented. It was just all over the place. So the insecure, disorganized babies had a behavior pattern that was really not fitting of any of the other attachment forms Ainsworth saw. They behaved in a disorganized, disoriented sort of way. During the strange situation, these babies might appear dazed, confused, maybe even fearful. And in order to be classified as disorganized, Ainsworth felt that the babies had to show a strong pattern of avoidance and resistance, or display certain specified behaviors such as extreme fearfulness around the caregiver. So these are the different types of attachment bonds she saw. The secure attachment bond and 3 forms of the insecure attachment bond: avoidant, resistant, and disorganized. Let's evaluate the strange situation. As you can guess, well, maybe not, but if you were to dig into the details of the experiment, you'll find that it was a bit culturally biased. German infants, for example, that's a different culture. Some of the infants in the study were German. They had German parents. So the infants of German parents, these children were more likely to show the avoidant pattern of attachment. The children of Japanese parents were more likely to show a resistant pattern of attachment. Now, why were these cultural differences present? Well, different cultures rear their children in different ways, okay? And, different cultures being, German parents, in this case, Japanese parents. These are 2 different cultures. The way they go about rearing their children is different in some ways. So because of the way they rear their children, you're going to see a lot of their children showing a particular pattern based on that. That's, why you got to factor in the cultural differences. That's why her experiment was a bit culturally biased. Let's look at caregiving style and attachment. Well, securely attached infants typically have caregivers who are sensitive to their signals and consistently respond to their needs. Yes, in order for a child to form a secure attachment bond to you, you have to be consistent. You have to consistently respond to their needs and fulfill them. If you do it on an inconsistent basis, they distrust you. If you don't do it on a regular basis at all, they certainly distrust you. The only way to form a secure bond with a child is to respond to their signals and respond to their needs on a consistent, regular basis. Caregivers of avoidant babies, they tend to be unavailable and rejecting. They often don't respond to their baby's signals. They often have little physical contact with them. So it's no surprise that the children of parents who behave that way, they tend to develop insecure, avoidant attachments because their parents are rejecting in a lot of ways and unavailable. They don't respond to their needs. They're not trusting of them. They don't trust that their primary caregiver will take care of them. And when they do interact with them, the infant may behave in an angry, irritable way. I needed you last time and you didn't respond. It's like if you need something and you ignore me, and then maybe the next time I need something you pay attention to me, I might still be mad about the previous time. Well, infants are no different. Caregivers of resistant babies, they tend to be inconsistent. They sometimes respond to their baby's needs, sometimes they don't. And in general, they tend to not be very affectionate people and not affectionate towards their baby, and these kinds of parents show little synchrony when interacting with their infants. There's none of that interactional synchrony that we talked about earlier in the chapter. So you got the the avoidant parent, the parents of avoidant children, insecure avoidant children, they're not available. They're not responding to their needs pretty much at all, and rejecting, and they're not there for them, so they avoid them. And you got the the resistant babies who are have an insecure resistant bond because their parent is inconsistent. They never know when they're going to do what they're supposed to do and when they're not. So they're always worried that they're not. Caregivers of disorganized babies, the insecure disorganized babies, often neglect or physically abuse their children. In some cases, these caregivers are depressed individuals, which makes for a sad situation. Let's look at fathers and mothers as caregivers. It goes without saying that on average, mothers spend considerably more time in caregiving duties with infants and children than fathers do. Not to say that you can't find examples of fathers that do more than mothers. You can. There are fathers out there that do just as much, and in some cases even more than mothers. I was and still am a very active father in my children's raising. I fed them, I took them to the doctor, I did homework with them, I changed their diapers, I did all that stuff, just like a lot of mothers do. So I'm not one of these fathers that sat back and let them mama do everything. But on average, in America, in our society, mothers do spend considerably more time in the caregiving duties with their infants and children than the fathers do. Mothers in this country are especially more likely to engage in the managerial role with their children, coordinating activities, making sure their healthcare needs are fulfilled, and so on. Back when I ran the 4-H program, I had a lot of activities for the children to do, especially during the summer, and anytime I called a house to remind them to come to the 4-H workshop, I got to the point where when a man answered the phone, I didn't talk to him. I asked him, could I speak to the lady of the house? Because in the beginning, when I would start to talk to the man about the 4-H workshop, he would always say, ho, let me get my wife. Very, very, very few examples of times where I spoke to a man that knew anything about what was going on with his child's schedule. That was handled by the mother. That's the typical case. Now, like I told you, when my boys were young, I was in just as much of a managerial role as the mother. I coordinated activities, made sure they got to the doctor, stuff like that, just like she did. So it was, a true 50-50 sort of deal. In the United States, the number of stay-at-home dads, and they do exist, has increased 300+% in the last from 96 to 2006, which was, good Lord, quite a bit ago. I don't know what the numbers are nowadays for stay-at-home dads. Overall, it's a small number. Let's just say it's not a big population out there of stay-at-home dads. If you have stay-at-home parents, typically they're mothers, but there are some stay-at-home dads. For a short time, you could look on TV and see shows like Modern Dads. It was a show that was on for a short time that was about stay-at-home dads. I didn't particularly like it because it made stay-at-home dads look like morons. Well, these stay-at-home dads were morons. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to diaper. They didn't know how to feed. None of that stuff. They looked stupid. They made dads look stupid, which I didn't like that portrayal because I'm a dad and I know what to do, and I don't like to be portrayed as an idiot. Many of these stay-at-home dads are very satisfied with their role, but as you can guess, they deal with a lot of discrimination. Because what is the typical stereotype of the father? To be the breadwinner. And if he's staying at home with the kids, you could see where society would, some segments of society could look at him and say, well, what's wrong with you? You're staying at home and doing the quote-unquote woman's work. What kind of man are you, quote-unquote? But there's nothing wrong in the 21st century for a man to stay at home and raise his children. That's, just like there's nothing wrong with a woman doing it. That's a strong thing to do. That is a admirable and, thing that should be, not looked down upon, but should be, hey, that's cool. But, some segments of society, hadn't grown up yet. I want you to understand, fathers can care for their children in a sensitive way and in a responsive way just as well as mothers, if they choose to do so. There was a time where fathers were thought of as the disposable parent. Yeah, that used to be more or less the mindset that, okay, if a child had to lose one of their parents, the father was the least valuable. As long as they still had the mother, they were okay. But the father is not the disposable parent. Children need both of them equally. And I like to always drive home the point that fathers can care for their children in a sensitive and responsive way just as good as mothers can if they choose to do so. Because, mothering is not an instinct. And mothers are not naturally the best parent. If they choose to be so, then sure. But fathers can be just as good as well. That is a point that I wanted to make clear. Now fathers, they interact with their children in different ways than their mothers. Mothers, tend to interact in a way that is more of a caretaker sort of thing. Fathers tend to engage in more of that rough and tumble play, more of the playmate, maybe a bit more of the disciplinarian. That's a difference. Mothers and fathers interact with their children, but they interact with them in slightly different ways. Children benefit when their fathers are positively involved in their caregiving. That's a positive when you got both parents engaged in your caregiving. If you got two parents engaged in your well-being, in your rearing, that's better than only one parent being engaged. So children benefit when fathers are positively involved in their caregiving. School success, for example, is affected in a positive way when fathers and mothers are equally engaged and involved with that. I'm very highly involved with my children's academic pursuits. I'm very much up on that. I got my power school on the phone. I know what the grades are. I know what them grades change. I'm all over that stuff because I want them to get good educations, to go off to college, to get good jobs, and to live the life that they want to live when they get older and be successful. Because I'm not going to always be here. So they're going to have to, figure it out at some point. But I'm here to help them in the meantime. Let's look at child care. Now, child care in our country is a growing need as more and more families have both parents in the workforce. Most homes, if they have both parents there, both work in order to make ends meet. The dual income family is on the rise because it's hard enough to make a living in today's society with one salary. You need two. But if both parents are out in the workforce and you have a preschool age child and these parents do not have family nearby that can keep the child, what do? In order to make a living, they have to put their child in child care. But it begs some questions. Does having your child in child care adversely affect them? If you're not at home raising them and interacting with them and quote-unquote bonding with them, having them in daycare for a large part of their day as you work, does that have an adverse effect on their development? Does it reduce their level of attachment to you, their parent? Does it retard their cognitive growth, or does it set back their cognitive growth? Sorry about that term. That's not a good term. Does it set back their cognitive growth? I'll tell you this, there is no research evidence available beyond a shadow of a doubt that says having your child in child care for long periods of time is a detriment to their overall development. When I say research evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'm not saying you can't go on Google right now and find some research studies that say putting your child in daycare is harmful. I'm sure you can find some, but you will find way more that say the exact opposite, that just by putting your child in child care does not necessarily have a detrimental effect on their development. Okay? So that's why that you can make the statement, there is no research evidence available beyond a shadow of a doubt that says having your child in daycare for a large amount of time during the course of the day while you work is detrimental to their development. It's just not. When research proves something beyond a shadow of a doubt, the best example of that is the fact that cigarettes cause cancer. We have proven that scientifically. It is a fact. It is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. There's no arguing that. You know, but like I said, you can go on Google and find a research study that says, no, don't put your child in child care. It's harmful. Somebody should stay home. Yeah, you'll find some studies, but you'll find way more that say that there's no proof behind that thought process. There is no evidence available that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that child care is harmful to your child's development. Let's talk about parental leave. Oh my goodness. We could do much better on parental leave in this country. United States adults cannot receive paid leave from work to care for their young children. You know? Yes, that's true. Based on U.S. law, you are guaranteed a certain amount of weeks of unpaid child care leave. Okay? Unpaid. That is guaranteed by law. I think it's like 9 weeks of unpaid child care leave. Now, if your employer is nice enough to give you paid leave, then that's great. But they didn't have to do that. The law says you have to provide those, whatever the number of weeks, I think it's 9 weeks. The law says you had to provide those 9 weeks of unpaid, but it doesn't say nothing about voluntarily paying for those weeks. I mean, why do we do it that way in America? Other countries around the world have different levels of paid maternal leave. I mean, if they can figure it out, why can't we? They have a level of paid maternal leave in Iraq, but we don't have it in America. Go figure. But anyway, American adults cannot receive paid leave from work to care for their young children. The law only guarantees those 9 or so weeks unpaid. Now, like I said, you might be lucky enough to have an employer that chooses to pay you for those, but it's a choice. They don't have to do it. About 2 million children in our country are in licensed child care, and many more millions of children are cared for by unlicensed, well, that's a typo, not bit sitters, babysitters, untrained people, they're left with Miss Mamie down the street. She's not a trained child care professional like you people are watching this video. Now, there are many variations in child care. Keep in mind that the quality of care that children receive is a significant indicator of positive development. The higher the quality of child care that a child is exposed to, the more positive the effect on their development is. But there's a flip side to that. The more poor the quality of child care is, the more negative an influence it can have on their overall development. So you want your child, if you're going to have to put your child in child care, you want them to be in a quality program. In a quality program that has quality standards, highly trained people, and a pleasant environment. So the quality of care that a child receives in child care is a very significant indicator for positive future development. But are all child care programs quality? Are they all the same level? Are they all top notch? You know, in your area, they might have 10 daycares. Are they all equal? Are they all top notch? Not necessarily, no. Child care programs vary as far as quality. They do share some common principles, but they do vary in a lot of ways. The quality of a child care program, if you wanted to boil it down to some essential factors, you can boil it down to three things: the teacher-child ratio, the total size of the group, and the education, experience, and training of the staff. Your quality early childhood programs have a low teacher-to-child ratio. The lower that ratio, the more interaction your child has with a child care professional. In the quality programs, they have smaller group sizes, because the smaller the group size, once again, the more interaction your child will have with a trained child care professional. And in the quality programs, they tend to have the most educated, the most experienced, and the highest trained people working there. That's what you find in the quality places. Okay? So these essential factors are what you can look for to see if a program is quality. Now, all children benefit from quality child care. All children would benefit from being in a quality child care experience. But certain groups in the population benefit the most. Children who live in poverty, who come from low-income backgrounds, they benefit the most from exposure to high-quality child care. However, the group that would benefit the most in some cases is the group least likely or least able to access quality child care. That's not a good thing, because quality costs money, and that's the reason why the group that would benefit the most, children from low-income backgrounds, sometimes do not receive quality care because they can't afford it. They can only afford the less than quality. Luckily, there's government programs that help children from low-income backgrounds access high-quality child care. I'm all for my tax dollars being spent on that. You spend money and invest money in children today, that's an investment in a competent U.S. citizen that will be a productive person. I tell students all the time, you can invest money in a child now, or invest money in that same child as an adult later on to lock them up. You make the choice. It's cheaper to spend money on them as a child, giving them quality child care experiences and whatnot. It's cheaper to invest in that than it is to spend money to keep them locked up the rest of their life. It costs a lot of money to keep a person locked up. Much more money than it would take to, invest in child care, to invest in preschool for all 4-year-olds, to invest in recreation programs and the arts and stuff like that, and music and whatnot. So just keep that stuff in mind the next time you wonder where your tax dollars are being spent. All right, that ends our presentation on Chapter 10. I hope this presentation has been useful.